Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. Borussia Dortmund extend their lead at the top of the Bundesliga with a big win over Gladbach. How did they do it? Where did Gladbach go wrong? Don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, we're going to break down how Dortmund beat Gladbach. So before we get into today's video, don't forget to give our video a thumbs up if you do enjoy it. The bell below does give you daily notifications regarding our organic, unfiltered soccer/footy analysis. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In today's video, we're going to briefly break down how Dortmund beat Gladbach, look to how both sides look to approach the game, get into the first half and see how they were able to go into halftime level 1-1, and then see how Dortmund were able to kill it off in the second half. But first, let's get to the starting lineups. No real surprises with Dortmund. 4-2-3-1. Paco up front ahead of Sancho, Reus, and Guerrero. In midfield, Witsel and Delaney. Then we get to Gladbach, more of a 4-5-1 that was supposed to be a 4-3-3. Playa up front, Hazard and Herman out in the wider areas, and in midfield they went with Kramer, Neuhaus, and Zakaria. So now let's get into the first half, see how both sides like to approach the game, and see who had the upper hand in the first half. Dortmund, Gladbach, the two top teams in the Bundesliga. When we do break this down, we have a 4-2-3-1 against a 4-3-3, but we had Dortmund with a lot of the possession, which saw eventually Gladbach drop into more of a 4-5-1. Their line wasn't very deep. They were trying to keep that mid-block, weren't trying to concede space between the lines, and were looking to press when they could and close down markers as they should. When you think about it, you have the midfield superiority, but you have to worry about Marco Reus, who has been one of the standout, if not the standout Bundesliga player this season. He likes to drop into these positions to get onto the ball. He likes to spring in behind, drift into the channels to lead counterattacks. But what happened here was that they have a good midfield balance in there because you have Neuhaus, you have Zakaria, and how it should be is Zakaria should be pushing to Witsel, it should be Neuhaus to Delaney, and Kramer just kind of tracking the movement of Reus. But Reus often drifted out into different positions, and what happened here was that they were marking positions and space very well. So if you push out to Zakaria, what would happen was that they would stick to him. If he pushed out to Neuhaus, they would keep an eye on him and monitor him. And if anything, if the ball was switched out to their markers, let's say the ball went out to Delaney, and Neuhaus had to push forward, you would have Kramer kind of tuck in and ensure that he tracked that movement, or vice versa. If you had Zakaria tracking Reus's movement because Reus was on his shoulder and you needed him to push forward, you would have Kramer step in. That was kind of how they were going about their business. In the wider areas, Hakimi was shut down by Herman. We didn't really see the best out of him. And down the right-hand side, Jadon Sancho wasn't doing much. And the fact was, Piszczek wasn't really getting forward, although he did an extremely good job on Hazard. But when you think about it, that was how they were going about it, dropping off a bit deeper when they needed to, but for the most part trying to keep not too high of a line, but enough of a line to ensure they could squeeze the space in those between the lines to ensure that Dortmund couldn't really offer anything in those areas, because you had Guerrero tucking in a bit narrow, you had Reus trying to float in there, Paco relies on service, and they had Sancho held out on the touchline, so he wasn't much of a threat in that regard. This was mostly about how Dortmund were going to break that down. We saw in the earlier stages Dortmund pressing from the front, looking to close early on, getting their wider players, their front players into those positions, trying to prevent Gladbach from playing out the back, and it did lead to some nervy moments. We saw Piszczek constantly swarming Hazard. We saw him constantly swarm Kramer. We saw Reus do the same thing. There was one time where he had Neuhaus push forward and he stepped into midfield. Reus stepped to him, and then it was Witsel or Delaney who stepped as well to ensure that he was dispossessed. When Kramer had the ball, you saw Reus tracking back, trying to swarm him, trying to dispossess him, nick the ball so that they could break forward. They were very proactive in the way that they were pressing, dropping off into more of two banks of four like they do without the ball. So there wasn't much of a threat from Gladbach because they're very good in that sense where they stay compact as well. They keep those two banks of four, and they really focus on ensuring that you force yourself into playing a pass that you don't want to and then breaking into the attack. The other element was the fact that when they were pressing from the front, there was the 3v2 element there. And the 3v2 element was the fact that, yes, they were able to close down in wider areas, but when they try to build out of the back, you had Paco, you had Reus trying to press the two center backs. At times they did go for two. At times we did see Reus kind of sit off, and you saw Paco stick to one. And eventually they were closing space, because even if Reus looked to pinch to one center back, he would try to ensure that you couldn't get a pass out to Kramer. There was one incident in particular in that first half where we saw it work to a T, where you had Paco sitting ahead of the goalkeeper Sommer. You had Reus near Bayer, and to ensure that the pass doesn't go out to Strobel, you could have Paco in the middle. So if the pass goes there, he's instantly within close proximity to close that down. What happens here is that the ball gets played out to Bayer, and he switches it to Johnson. There you have Guerrero tight to him, and you have Reus kind of tucking towards him now. So as you see that, it looks like more of a 2v1, and then you see Fabian Johnson try to spin Guerrero, who dispossesses him, and he plays the pass in between the center backs for Paco, and as that happens, Reus runs off Bayer. Reus should score, but he fires a shot on goal, and Sommer pushes it away. But it just goes to show how that press, although they were outnumbered, they were intelligent with how they swarmed, they were intelligent as how they marked space, and that was very key. The other opportunity that really did show something was that the fact that, like I said, they never really got Piszczek going, but there was one play in particular where you saw Sancho drag out Went, and you saw the 1-2 where Piszczek played it to him and was able to bypass Hazard and drive forward. And what happened there is that as he broke into that box, because Hazard couldn't catch him, Paco was making the run into the box, but the cross into that box was played in behind him. But that was solely how they were trying to get through, because when you think about it, Gladbach only had one threat, and Piszczek wasn't really being able to overlap. Sancho was stuck wide and not really getting any sort of numerical advantage down that side, wasn't causing a threat, and Hazard was tracking back as well. But on the flip side, Hazard was their sole threat, and Piszczek was tight with him, tracked him throughout the game, and his threat was minimized, which helped Dortmund ensure that Gladbach didn't have much of an attacking threat. So with that being said, you could see how the game was going. So now let's look to the first half chances and see how both sides gained an advantage and how this game went 1-1 going into halftime. When you dissect the pattern of the play in the first half, you can understand why there were very few chances. You look at the fact that Gladbach are sitting much deeper and they don't have enough men to push forward to help join play and attack. And you look at Dortmund, who have struggled throughout the season breaking down teams that sit a bit deeper and highly rely on playing on swift counters or breaking into the channels when the opportunity presents itself. When we look at some of their opportunities, the first one does stem from Hakimi playing a pass into the left channel. What we do see is Reus drop off into that space, and he pulls out Johnson with his movement as he looks to check in for the ball. That allows Guerrero to push into the space where Bayer is to chase the ball that Hakimi plays into that space. The thing here is that when Reus checks in, he instantly spins back around into that space to get the pullback. And when he gets the pullback, you have Johnson and you have Kramer kind of pushing in, trying to close him down as he receives the pullback, and he pokes the ball into the path of Paco, who pokes his effort inches wide. This is what Paco is all about. We saw a chance earlier on where Guerrero was able to break forward in transition and slide it into him. He is perfect for this role in this system because he is a pure finisher, and on these counterattacks, that is what Dortmund really need. However, in that move, we saw Strobel get across. The two center backs in Strobel and Bayer were able to sweep up, and it led to Hakimi firing a shot inches wide of the net. However, after that, we did see Paco come off with an injury, and we saw Mario Götze come on. We'll get to that in a bit, but we did see Gladbach create a chance of their own, and it did stem from a ball out of the center back position from Strobel, and he was able to clip it over Hakimi for Herman, who was able to break in behind him and pull it back from half space to Neuhaus, who was breaking towards the box, but he was only able to fire a tame effort on goal. So when you think about that, they were playing more direct. They had the opportunity there. Götze comes on now. With Götze, you get something different. He likes to drop off deeper into that space. He likes to pull off and offer an outlet. He's not really renowned for making runs into the box, but he did try and break those lines and play off the last shoulder throughout this game. When we look to the build up to the goal, we kind of see what he offers you that perhaps you would think that Paco would offer it, but you know Götze is going to give you this. What happens here is that we see Reus step to Bayer. who did receive a pass back, and he presses him, and it leads to him giving the ball away to Guerrero. And as he gives the ball away to Guerrero, what happens here is that now Reus is able to drive into that left channel. And as he drives into that left channel, what happens here is that you have Götze running into the box with him as well. And Reus is able to play the ball into Götze, who slides it back to Sancho running with Wendt. And as he takes on Wendt, what happens here, he's able to cut outside, beat him 1v1. We never really got those opportunities from Sancho in the first half because it was always on the touch line where they were able to provide numbers with Hazard there or just push him more so to the wide areas to the byline. Here, he was pushed out to the byline, but he's able to finish superbly, and that made the difference. You would think that Dortmund were going to go into halftime up 1-0, but that wasn't the case. Gladbach fired back, and again, it shows more direct play from them. It's Zakaria slipping past Reus, and as he slips past Reus, he slides the ball to Johnson, and that is wide of the narrow Guerrero. He slides it to him, and what happens here is that he's able to slide in between Guerrero and Hakimi, and this is the first time that we see Thorgan Hazard now drift out into this space from the left-hand side ahead of Toprak. And what happens is Zakaria continued his run, and the pass into Hazard saw him continue his run into that channel, and he tries to clip the ball into Hazard ahead of Toprak. No one gets to it, but we see Kramer continue his run into the box. Does he handle it? Does he not? Here at the interviews, we're not here to discuss that, but we do see him get the ball, bring the ball down. He's able to fire it past Berkey from point blank range. When you break down the chances as a whole, you see Dortmund and how quickly they're able to change from defense to attack, and they used Reus, they used Guerrero. Götze played a key role, which was key, and Sancho finally got off the byline, but Gladbach had answers for Dortmund with more direct play and eventually got the equalizer, which should have built up a nice second half. But as we get into the second half, we're going to see how Dortmund were able to get past Gladbach and what didn't really live up to the heights, but we see how Dortmund and Mario Götze made the difference. The second half, on the other hand, saw more of Reus and Götze do what they do best, and that's floating into space, pulling markers out of position, and that was how Dortmund were able to win this game. In the opening stages of the second half, we see it early on. The ball is switched out from Witsel to Guerrero, and what does he do? He's able to slide the ball between Wendt, between Hazard for Reus. But what it does here is that we see Reus peel in behind Zakaria, and he's able to get the ball and then instantly turn his marker in Kramer and drive forward at Strobel. But what happens here is that he's only able to lash his shot wide of the net, but it just goes to show just a simple passing move. Pass out, split the midfield. He's able to run in behind a marker that's not even tracking his movement, which they did do well in the first half, and he's able to use his body movement to turn Kramer and drive forward at the center backs. And again, that's a big warning sign. The build up to the goal actually does show that Gladbach were showing some sign of intent, because it does lead with Playa getting the ball in the left channel, sprung out to him. He's unable to get by Piszczek and Toprak. What happens there, the ball is eventually set out to Sancho. Sancho actually played that first ball in. So now Sancho gets the ball, and what happens there is that he's tracked by Zakaria, and with Zakaria stepping into his position, based on the fact that there is no Wendt in position at that moment, Zakaria steps into his position, and you have Kramer stepping to Reus. What happens there is that he plays the ball into that space, into Reus, and Reus is able to instantly play it right back into Sancho breaking forward. Zakaria tracks him well, but as Sancho cuts in, and what we end up seeing here is Götze pull out into that space where Wendt should be. When he pulls out into that space, what we do see here now is now Strobel is now tracking him into that left space right there, into that channel. What we now see is Reus continue his run from a deeper position in between Bayer, in between Johnson, and the cross is inch perfect. It takes out Bayer out of the game, and Reus is able to continue his run and tap it in. That's a classic Dortmund goal. Starts from their half, ends in the other half, but it just stems from good movement. Reus pulling out Kramer, Sancho continuing his run, beating his marker, which they need him to do. Götze pulling out into that channel. Reus again continuing his run in between the defenders to finish off the play, and that is what Dortmund did very well. Gladbach did look to bring in some changes. They brought on Hoffman, they brought on Traore, didn't really offer much, and And what we did see from Gladbach is that they did bring those players on, but Dortmund continued what they were doing best, and that was pulling players out of position. There was one play in particular where it just kind of stems up what Mario Götze does offer. You expected him, like against Dusseldorf, to kind of drop off and kind of link play, but here he was looking to break in behind, looking to make those darting runs in the build-up to what should have possibly been another goal from a Reus free kick. It's Hakimi who has the ball, and he slides it in between Neuhaus and in between Neuhaus and in between the wider player and Herman. And what happens there is he slides into him, and we see Götze making that darting run off Bayer, who's forced to take him out, and he takes him on a dangerous position, which eventually leads to a Reus free kick that's curled off the post. This is not to say that Gladbach didn't have any chances, but they didn't push many men forward. The changes were positive, but they never really influenced their shape. They never really tried to be more proactive. The one chance they did have besides that again stemmed from Playa, and it goes to show that Hazard was locked down. Because what happens here, it's a clearance pass, and Hazard's able to, or Playa is able to drag out Weigl, and Piszczek is higher, and he drags him out and plays a reverse pass into Hazard, who's breaking. Weigl's able to track it well, but what happens there is that Hazard beats him, but again, you see Piszczek making the run across, and he slides in to make the vital intervention, and that kind of sums up Gladbach's night. Very organized, and in the remainder of the game, Dortmund were trying to break them down. They never really created any more chances besides the ones that were stated, and even so, when Gladbach did push men forward, Dortmund in those two banks of four, just very organized, very compact, know their roles, and again, Gladbach were wary of the threat of Reus and Götze on the counterattack with Sancho and Guerrero breaking forward, so that was a big issue for them, but just not enough from Gladbach, whereas Dortmund had the creative brilliance of Reus, of Götze, and the fact that Sancho and Guerrero were so pivotal when they were able to get space to break into the channels, and that made the difference here. But let me know what you guys think. Does this rule out Gladbach's chance of challenging for the title? Are Dortmund now in clear position to knock off Gladbach and Bayern Munich in the second half of the season to win the Bundesliga for the first time in years? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.